Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And very good evening to you, and a splendid evening at that, and welcome to Newsline Live. Now then, everybody's minds is on taxation, absolutely. Whoever thought that that would become the talk of the town, but it is. Such is the strange goings on of this government, and actually the previous one too. Politicians in general. But anyway, this evening we've got a taxation specialist, Mr. N.R. Gajendran. Very good evening to you, Mr.
Good evening for us.
Now then, isn't this proposed tax, the surcharge tax, isn't it going to be counterproductive?
Well, this surcharge tax was proposed in the November budget.
Yeah.
No one spoke about it.
Yeah.
But now there is some umbrage on this, because I think first and foremost, intentionally or unintentionally, the EPF and ETF has been brought in. The only other aspect is whether this has an element, retroactive element. Apart from that, if any imposition of tax, it has to be efficient. And
right.
One of the condition to be efficient is it should satisfy the test of ability to pay,
yeah,
or the capacity to pay. The person who been called upon to pay, the target person for the tax, should have the ability to pay that tax.
But when you impose this retrospective application,
yeah,
especially with companies,
yeah,
where the accounts have been filed, the profits have been distributed amongst the shareholders, the retained profits have probably been reinvested into various other projects, and then a year later the government says to you, oh, hello, excuse me, we want 25% of that. Isn't that's what I mean about being counterproductive? Won't it hamper their growth?
Generally, there are two. One is a retroactive legislation, other one is a retrospective legislation. Retroactive taxes imposes taxes on past taxes on past transaction.
Yeah.
The retrospective one imposes future taxation on past transaction.
Right.
This falls on the border of retrospective, that is on the past transaction, 21 profits.
Yeah.
They are imposing tax now. And
doesn't that show poor planning?
The retroactive provisions are permitted in the constitution of the country.
Yes, but
and if it is generally it is considered of national importance and requirement, because this country has lost a heavy amount of revenue, about 600 billion.
But that's not the fault of the people. It's the fault of this government. When they came in, they gave a tax break to all these people, and now they've lost the revenue. And on top of that, they didn't know that COVID is coming, but now it's like a double whammy. And surely they gave the tax concessions as some political gimmick. When the country can't afford to give money away like that, surely. Do you agree?
There's a point in what you say. Now we have heavily relied on expanding the circulation of money, that is printing of money.
Yeah.
Why that happened was because we have foregone taxes in a big way. Now we have to rectify this situation somewhere. You have to go back to raise revenue to meet your expenditures and also to service your debts, particularly the local debts. So naturally you have to impose tax. So here it was also debated in Parliament when during the budget time only about 60 to 65 companies will be affected. Yes, true, this is after the profits have been distributed. The presumption is if you see the corporate profits, it has fueled in the last year or so for various reasons. Large companies' profits have become larger, and the presumption is that they will continue to make similar profits in the ensuing year. So they will have the capacity to pay. If someone has had a very awkward year of 1 year of over 2 billion or that, and after that they are going back to a very low base, then they will have a problem.
What happens when these companies who've on the face of it, in the past accounts on 21, they've obviously made the profit, so they qualify if this tax was to be brought forward. They qualify, and they've already distributed, as I said, the profits, and they've reinvested it and so on, and their growth will be stymied. They may well decide that to pay the tax they're going to have to cut costs, and they may even start retrenching staff. Then what happens? Isn't that then a double whammy to the government?
On the contrary, some of these companies have increased the basic pay of the staff.
Yes, that's because, I put it to you, Mr. Gajendran, that these companies have a legitimate expectation that the legislation in place, that they can rely on the legislation in place, and there is a legitimate expectation that they are not going to be taxed retrospectively in the future after they've made their plans. Yeah. It sounds terribly unfair. It's almost like a cricketer getting out and saying, "Oh, can I have another chance? Another chance to bat."
There is an opportunity for any of these corporates or any person of interest to seek the intervention of the court. Yeah. Because the bill, once it's presented in Parliament, you will have 7 days to seek that. If you see even the special goods and services tax bill it's before the courts on the constitutionality, and also if you see the gazette notification of the conversion of mandatory conversion of dollars into rupees, that is also apparently, I believe, it's in courts. So we are in desperate times, and certain desperations has been caused by COVID.
I put it to you, really, that isn't this a lack of planning? They suddenly say, "Oh my God, we need this revenue, so let's tax these companies that are making a profit." Or some companies, mainly driven by the demands created by COVID-19, have increased their profits, and these are the export companies. They've made handsome profits, but that doesn't mean that the government ought to be facilitating their growth, because after all, the private sector is the engine of growth, and they will create jobs and so on, and not the country. The last time somebody promised us 1 million new jobs, and when you look at the figures at the central bank, it was actually minus 400,000 jobs. That's absolute rubbish. These people just continue to lie and lie. But thank you very much for all the questions. Everybody's sending questions this evening. And here's one. The supergains tax surcharge, as was imposed in 2015, effective for the 2016 budget, was categorically stated to be a one-off tax. The same sovereign entity, namely the government of Sri Lanka, is thus precluded from reimposing such a tax or surcharge a second time. Shouldn't the repetition and imposing of yet another one-off tax for a second time, shouldn't it be cancelled?
For us, I won't be surprised if this tax is repeated.
For the third time? And the fourth time?
It can be repeated, because if you go back to history, the Save the Nation law, the National Building Act, Nation Building Act, the National Security Act, when they were pronounced in the parliament, in the respective parliaments, it was considered said to be a temporary tax.
Like the Prevention of Terrorism Act, ladies and gentlemen, 42 years in the temporary tray. Now then, I'm sorry, but all these questions are about the same thing. The imposition of the surcharge such as this is in effect a tax on reserves. The accounting entries would not permit a retrospective tax of this nature to be accounted for in the books of the company other than out of its reserves. It is a well-known tenet of taxation that reserves of a company are not liable for tax, whether it be a surcharge or otherwise. Therefore, taxation on company reserves should be withdrawn. As a tax specialist, you should be able to answer that one.
It's a good question, but this is not the first time the retroactive tax has been imposed.
That doesn't mean it doesn't make it right.
And these accounting issues should have been in there that time also.
Yeah.
But in imposing tax, accounting principles or issues cannot guide the imposition of tax.
But surely, Mr. Gajendran, everything should gel, shouldn't it?
No, it doesn't gel. Taxation, there is no fairness in imposing tax. So when there is something, no,
well,
it's not
there is a
fair.
fairness in a way because
No,
the
it's
country
not.
needs to
No, no.
develop
You got
and
take.
so on.
That's what I think. So then you have to choose. They have to be cherry picking. What's the one you're going to tax?
Yeah.
Is it better to tax 65 people or to tax 6.5 million people? So that's the question. So if there was an imposition on, I'm sure they will be considering down the line to increase the VAT rates and they bring in the threshold for VAT. They may have to do that if they want to recoup revenue, because now basically we have only income tax and VAT. There is no other taxes.
Isn't there an anomaly where, or is it an anomaly, a company declaring a profit of say 100 million, but owned by an individual, may not be taxed, whether it is a surcharge or otherwise, whereas another company earning a profit of 100 million would be subject to a surcharge if it is owned by another individual or a company if it has a group profit in excess of 2 billion.
Yeah. So they have considered the group profit. It was considered in the 2015 budget also. They are looking the group as a totality. As not as individual entity. When it's a group, they are looking at a group, and group taxations are even if you see that even the existing laws, group taxes are unfairly taxed or discriminatorily taxed, even if they are less than the SME threshold. Right. So this is already in this anomalies are in the laws, and once it's legislated, because that's the reason you want revenue. So you are trying to pick your choices, and if it is a corporate tax, generally world over, don't forget before, even in US, before Trump's time, he brought to 21%, effective rate was about 50%. Now we have been boasting of a low tax jurisdiction, but when shove gets to push, you have to raise revenue. Because all
but
these
they gave that revenue away when
yes,
they came into power. They need to admit their mistakes.
If the state was impolitic at a point, it doesn't need to be that they have to repeat that, because they have to some sense has to come in, because otherwise you will start printing money. And
what about reversing the tax the tax break? How about reversing
it can happen, but they have promised that they won't do for 3 years. I think this is the third year.
But when they asked the companies to pay a one-off, when Mr. Wickremesinghe said, well, we had no choice, man, we had to do it. That's exactly what he said at
that one-off tax was brought at that time because they to recoup the salary increase of 10,000 rupees.
Right.
And at that time the debate was okay, you will for 1 year. What
they've done it again. 5,000.
Yeah, that is because they gave gave away 400 to 600 billion, and they are only trying to raise 100 billion here.
Now this business, the threshold is 2 billion in profits, which is actually only $10 million. If people, the potential foreign direct investors coming into Sri Lanka, and they look at this little country and say, oh my God, they consider $10 million to be big money. Surely it's not big money. Even if you're making 10%, and to recover your capital in 10 years, 10% it's nothing really. Come on. Doesn't it send the wrong message that this tiny little country out in the Indian Ocean, they think that 10 million is big money?
It's a sad story because you say 2 billion is not a big money.
Yeah.
But how many people are having that? Only 60 to 65 companies.
Well,
and that's also groups put together.
It could. I put it to you that.
So that means Sri Lanka has not done.
Couldn't it be much longer? Couldn't it be much bigger? I mean, because if the government of the day, they have no business being in business. They should be facilitating business. So if they had facilitated all this business, we're a 30-year war. Look at the size of, let's say, JKH. Imagine the potential. It's this what-if business. So the government of the day, shouldn't they be encouraging business and not holding them back? So the 65 may have been 650 companies if business was facilitated.
You're justifying why Sri Lanka has gone wrong for the last 50 years. In 1951, it was announced in the budget also that Sri Lanka's GDP was about $1.5 billion and Singapore was 700 million. And today Singapore is about $340 billion, and we are just, I think, 80 billion. That number is coming down with the rupee depreciating. And Singapore is 5 times smaller than us in the population. So I think
and doesn't have three-quarters of the resources.
It is not only this government for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, I'm not blaming this government. I'm blaming successive governments and successive politicians who have not had the vision and the far-sightedness to put it
I think
right.
we will revive only if we hit nadir, hit rock bottom. I don't know whether we have done that. And I think if we are going to revive, one condition that will lead the way is the parliament, entire parliament must unanimously resolve that they are going to stop and fight corruption. If you don't do that, we will be worse off day by day, and it's going to get worse, you know, if you don't do any of these things, and particularly if you don't curb corruption. And the second question, if you want to do anything, you have to appoint competent people. I think from 1977, after the constitution changed, we have not appointed competent people for key positions.
Can there be competent people when, I put it to you, that of Sri Lanka's population of, let's take 22 million, 21 million, the number of university students, the capacity is just 0.22%. South Korea, I use South Korea because South Korea at one time had a per capita GDP of similar dollar difference between Sri Lanka and South Korea. Today, it's about 3.4% of their population has got university. They have 2 million student population, you know, university population, and so on. So, with our education system in shambles, or not having had enough attention paid to it, Sri Lanka is in an unfortunate situation where we export domestic labor as opposed to a quality individual, educated, and who can play a dynamic, active, decisive, and incisive role in the development of world economies. On that note, let's go for a short break and take a peek at this evening's headlines from the wonderful Newsfirst team. And we'll see you on the other side of the break, shall we?
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukatali.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. On behalf of Team Newsline Live, I'd like to acknowledge the many questions that we get over the different programs. Today has been particularly heavy, and also I'd like to say thank you for all those abroad who follow us, including people in various parts of the United States, in Texas, in New York City, in Los Angeles, in the United Kingdom, in Ireland too, and also not forgetting our loyal following in Australia, Australia and New Zealand as well. And of course we have a robust community who follows us from the Middle East. The economic impact of COVID-19 and poor planning is a combination of hell. Matters like nepotism, political patronage, and state-sponsored corruption are the accompaniments. Would you agree?
I think so. And this has proliferated particularly after 1977. With the change in the constitution, civil service was destroyed, and to key position you appoint to your relatives who are not at all competent and capable to fill these positions. And then you had the fancy of introducing law through gazette notification, where a minister can do, and they go through that process. The parliament approves or disapproves. It never disapproves. It has always approved the gazette up within 3 months. But in the meantime, damage has been created. So as I go back, if this country is to revive, for us, nothing need not be done. Just collectively, the parliament, entire parliament, has to come together and pledge to dedicate to eradicate corruption.
Can I ask you, Mr. Gajendran, I had a member of the SJB on this program who told me almost off the cuff that the first, that super gains tax, that it wasn't imposed or it wasn't implemented. But I do know that some companies actually paid.
No, it was legislated. So once it's legislated, it's implemented. People paid that.
They had to pay.
They had to pay that.
So it was implemented.
Whoever said that, they have misled you.
They have misled me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I should get the recording out there, and it'll be available on Facebook and YouTube on what they said. But, Mr. Gajendran, you mentioned, you touched on this, that the entire parliament needs to come together and denounce corruption and put in a robust plan to actually implement that. In the meantime, can we afford the luxury of something called Sri Lankan Airlines? It's an utter drain on our treasury. Every blessed year, apart from a couple maybe when Emirates managed it, but they that's a different story. But the bottom line question is, can we afford to have Sri Lankan Airlines?
For us, you use the word "in the meantime" term.
Yeah.
There is nothing in the meantime.
It must be done now.
It has to be done now. If prudent, well thought out, considered decision made after introspection, and no corruption. I'm not only talking financial corruption, also intellectual corruption. That has to stop. Nothing you can put it right till that.
Okay. Intellectual corruption, you're talking about people who sit there and try and
if you
design
see,
laws to...
If you see, even at discussions, there is a lot of sophistry and chicanery, duplicity. We have a habit of saying something and trying to convince and prove that. They believe even untruth is stated over and over again and justified, it becomes true. So, those things have to stop, and if that is happening, the leaders should call up and say, no, don't do this. Don't mislead the people. So it has to come. Otherwise, it's no point, you can't do anything, because down the line there will be some decision will not be made in the proper perspective. Naturally, there will be...
Now then, what do you think how do you think the people will react to the news or the interpretation by some that this EPF and ETF funds will also be subject to this surcharge tax?
No, that is true. It is, as the bill stands, is going to be subject to the surcharge tax. I'm sure when the budget was pronounced, that was not taken into account, because they expected about 100 billion rupees to be collected from this tax. But this, the EPF and ETF itself, we can bring about close to something 100 billion on this tax. The problem here is that when we introduced the new law, we brought in a definition for the term company. This again we followed Ghana's law, and that definition of the company was very broad. The company word uses the word company, corporation. We don't have a corporation in Sri Lanka. Only corporation we can think is public corporation. We have used an alien term. The word company itself is not there in our new definition. Under the old act, company was a company incorporated under the
Companies Act.
Under the laws of the country or any other country. Here the word company is not, and is so broad, even a government is a company. Government other than a Sri Lankan government is a company.
Do you think that was a case of intellectual corruption?
No, this is they followed another law, and when you
copy-pasted it from Ghana or somewhere like that.
Exactly, and that because of this, now they have friendly societies, pension funds, provident funds.
Those are alien terms here.
Yeah, and it's too broad. Anything can be brought, and that's the reason this has been brought in.
My point, going back again, is that if we have a largely educated population, then if by inference by implication even, we will have a better quality, educated representative.
How can you have that? Even in our parliament, they say about 90 odd people in parliament are not got through O levels.
That's right.
And so it starts from there. So it starts from there. So you have to get people who educated, qualified people who are and who are prepared to face the delectation of the magnitude. If they are willing to do that, they have to, and the major parties must put forward candidates like that. Otherwise, who will? I mean,
exactly. The major parties are actually to blame for this sorry state.
They have to come and answer why are they? How is that Sri Lanka is having so many people who have not got through their primary, secondary level education? If that number is true, right? It's repeated. It's mentioned in Parliament also. And the people who have not got through, it doesn't mean that you had to be, you must have to be learned, you have to be qualified and educated. But
you must have the basic.
You must have the basic. If you don't have the basic, you should have you should prove that you are informed without the basics, and you are learned. You have gained learnings, and you have become intellectually sound.
At least you have experience in.
And you have done it. So it's you won't get it right.
Mr. Gajendran is absolutely right. The whole parliament and people need to eradicate corruption to take the country forward. Shouldn't the people all take a stand and say, we refuse to pay a bribe, we will not pay a bribe, if we're stopped by the police, well, we'll pay the fine, but you write out the ticket and we'll go and pay it.
No, it's not going to work for us.
Why
The
is that?
fish stinks from the head. So if the top, that is the parliament and down, they have to lead the leadership. Otherwise, take a poor man, can you go to any of this government department without anyone's influence and get a small thing done?
Thank you very much, Mr. Gajendran, for your time on Newsline. I'd like to say this, it's a combination of different messages. The combination of our executive and our legislature, as we see it now, is truly a combination of hell. The only saving grace appears to be the judiciary. In God we trust. Take care, and God bless you all.